right. Well, hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our AMA. I am joined here by Chris Adderley, and I'll just get this kicked off here with our first question. SkyZip 4K, he wants to just, can you introduce yourself and your position in the studio and maybe talk a little bit about what you work on?
Yeah, so my position in the studio is a senior mechanical concept designer, which is a really interesting title, and it basically means that what I do is I make sure that our tech and our systems that we're designing are kind of like accurate and have the appropriate level of realism for what we want to target in. That's what I was hired for, but I've been branching out a lot in the last year or so into a lot more systems design and everything surrounding our parts, basically.
Awesome. Our next one here comes from James M. Were you modding before KSP? What made you want to mod, and how did you know what game you wanted to mod?
I started modding a really long time ago, back in high school. I started modding Star Trek Armada, which is a really old Star Trek RTS.
That's a throwback.
Really, yeah. If you've played that, you'll know what it was like. So I did a bit of modding there. I dabbled in a couple of other games, most specifically Battle for Middle Earth. I'm a pretty big Lord of the Rings nerd, so that was a great RTS to play with. Then I discovered Kerbal, and it was really fun. And I thought I could make this cooler, and that's when I started to mod it. So
That's awesome. Bringing back some good memories of games there. Our next one here is from user Mo Eggs. What is one thing that was different from your expectations in your change from modder to developer? Are there things that were challenging as a modder that now make more sense from your perspective as a developer?
I think overall, as a modder, you have a framework to build on, and that's really useful. And it's something that I think that I took for granted a lot of the time. It's like KSP1 as a modding framework is really a good modding framework. And when I look at my time making mods, there was lots of griping about what I could and what I couldn't do. And now that I'm kind of more in the back end of things, I understand a lot more of the design decisions and the thought that went into things. I do kind of miss the freedom of being able to do whatever I want in a modding context. But yeah, this is better.
Awesome. Our next one here comes from Heretic. As a fan favorite modder turned developer, what was one particularly memorable or satisfying moment you've experienced while working on KSP2 that you'd like to share?
So this is a cool thing that happened in a team playtest a couple of weeks ago. We'll do these playtests where the studio goes together and we'll fly rockets, and we'll usually have a goal or some sort of new feature that we're trying to test. And we were launching rockets, and we were looking at basically our new system, which shows your trajectory as you're burning. And somebody had created a trajectory that looked really weird to everybody. But this was actually a correct trajectory. And from a rocketry perspective, it started to kind of show some of the trades that go into what trajectory your rocket uses during launch. So I love it when we create a new system which actually gets into the why of real rocketry, and that makes me really excited, as you can tell from my happy face here.
You're always happy, Chris. That's awesome. Our next one is from user Gargoyle. Hey, Chris, big fan of your mods in KSP1. I honestly consider them essential. What have you learned from your days as a KSP1 modder that helped you in your role in KSP2?
I think I learned a lot of what not to do, honestly. Being able to kind of operate in a vacuum and build mods gave me a lot of room to test out theories, test out ideas. And I was able to come into the team and say, when we have a concept, I could say, I tried that. It was not well received by the audience. Or I tried that. I feel like it's too complicated. Or I tried this. There's a lot of kind of experimentation that I was able to do that I was able to bring straight into the team.
That's fair. We definitely see that. Our next one here is from user The Tunnel. From being a mod developer to a dev on KSP2, what has been your favorite moment?
I think one of my favorite moments was coming into the project and looking at our internal wikis and stuff and seeing some of my stuff as references. I felt like I'd really made it at that point, and that is also very embarrassing, but
Famous confirmed, right?
exactly.
Our next one here is from Spycat. What mistakes did you learn from making mods in KSP1 that helped you on issues for KSP2?
Yeah, so this is kind of a good extension of that other question, and I've got a good example here, and it's about nuclear rockets. So, nuclear rockets are basically they take the concept of let's make a very, very hot object, let's run propellant over it, and it expands and creates thrust. I spent a lot of time modding KSP1 and trying to make really realistic feeling nuclear rocket simulations. None of those were well received. The idea that you need to wait for a reactor to heat up before you can use it, and then it has to cool down, and you have to deal with the heat. It kind of sounds cool, but it played very poorly. So that's one of my larger mistakes that I made in my mods that I'm able to kind of like take a look at here with the help of the rest of the design team and everything.
This is like your modding retrospective now.
Pretty much, yeah.
Our next one here is from user Tycho the Pug. Which milestone are you most excited to work on?
I have zero doubt in saying colonies. We're obviously as we go through early access, we're going to go through a lot of milestones, and I think the colonies is the most like transformative in terms of how people are going to play KSP.
That's fair and awesome. Our next one here is from Noob Eater. Is it fun working on KSP2 at Intercept Games?
Well, I mean, it's a job, so every day has its ups and its downs. Having fun right now, but some days are frustrating, some days are awesome. Some days I get to see really cool art that people are working on. Some days I get to see a new system that's come online, and those are really satisfying things.
A lot of good moments. That's definitely, I agree with you there. We have another one from Spycat here. What's your favorite mod on KSP2 so far?
So I haven't dived into the modding scene a lot in KSP2, but I've been seeing some really good work that's come out of like improving trajectory planning and flight planning, and I can't think of the name of the mod off the top of my head. But those kind of mods are really cool, and I like to see what people are doing in that space with the new tools that we've given them.
Always watching, even after. Well, that's awesome. Our next one here is from Nova Raptor TV. How closely does KSP2's team follow developments in the aerospace industry? Does it help you guys to come up with ideas for parts or other features to add in KSP2?
Well, we've got a lot of people who like space here, and there's a lot of space stuff on the walls in this room, so I think we're representing that pretty well. Everybody's really in the loop about the cool stuff that's coming, and we've got like an internal Slack channel where we'll post space news and stuff, and share it out to the rest of the team, which so we're pretty aware of what's going on in the industry because we kind of have to be. And every time there's a new cool development that comes out, maybe there's like a new hypothetical engine type or something, somebody on the team will DM me and they'll be like, Chris, when is this going in the game? And then I have to say like, we'll think about it.
Sounds like everything I ever asked for as a child. We'll think about it, Michael. We'll get there. Our next one here is from Afterglow79. What is your favorite part that you can talk about that's been made? Also, what's your favorite type of cheese?
So this is kind of like maybe the not most exciting part, but it's the big spherical hydrogen tank. And I like kind of the big cool aesthetic of that tank. It's really cool. But what I'd like even more is all of the cool stuff the community has built with it that I could have never possibly imagined. And that is really fun. And that's kind of one of the cool things. It's like, yeah, we make parts, but we make parts that all of the community can leverage and make cool things with. And that's exciting to me. And I think like smoked Gouda is like, that's where it's at.
I forgot I had that part of the question. Our next one here is also from Spycat. What are things that you can't make too realistic for gameplay reasons?
Every single thing in the game, possibly. This is a fun question because like one of the things that make this job cool is like trade spaces, right? It's like we're always trading realism versus gameplay, and we're always trying to put that line in a good place that hits the requirements of like everybody who's playing the game. And a lot of different people play the game in a lot of different ways. So trying to figure out systems that are appropriately deep, that they represent the real challenges and you get some realism going, but also that they're actually usable is a really hard problem. And I like hard problems.
That's why you do what you do. Our next one here is from user Kaveric. Is it true that you derive sustenance and nutrients from reading white papers and looking at white box models?
I mean, I think I mostly derive sustenance and nutrients from drinking a stupid amount of coffee.
That's true. I've definitely witnessed this.
Yeah. It's not maybe not the best for me. But yeah, I do like making white box models. They're lots of fun. They're what I joined the team for, and I do read a lot of abstracts and white papers. They're, read a few less papers all the way through than I used to these days, but abstract conclusion, go through it. It's good. Look at the figures.
Our next one here is from Tycho the Pug. What is the favorite mod you made for KSP1? Bonus question, what is your favorite mod for KSP1 you didn't make?
It's just like picking your favorite child. So that's hard, but I think like there's two that I would call out from my own stuff that I like. One is the Far Future Technologies mod, because I think I did a good job with that one. I think there was a lot of like integration of hypothetical and future technologies that came together in a like artistically and gameplay good way. But I also like Near Future Solar, which just adds a ton of solar panels to the game, and I like solar panels. So aesthetically, that one's up there. As for favorite KSP1 mod that I didn't make, well, there's a lot of good mods out there, so it's hard to pick one. I'm going to say that some of the visual mods like Scatterer are definitely like really up there in bringing the quality of the game's visuals up. And I will give a shout out to Blue Dog Design Bureau, which is a just like stupidly well researched take on like all of American rocketry. And there's great models, there's great research that's gone into it. It's a great achievement.
No, that's fair. There's a lot of good ones to choose from. So,
Yeah.
our next one here comes from Heretic. What are your hopes for the future of KSP2?
All right, I got two primary goals here. One is to, this is very aspirational, but I want to convert all KSP1 players to KSP2 players, right? And modders too. That would be ideal. And the second one is that I want my mom to be able to achieve orbit in KSP2, which she's tried in KSP1 and has not succeeded. So, that's a core goal here.
Oh,
It's my approachability goal.
well, you're gonna have to watch some of those tutorials, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Our next one here is from user Burnt Out. What other games are you playing at the moment?
Well, I just finished Tears of the Kingdom, playing it with my kids. It's lots of fun. Great game. I'm currently starting through my backlog of accumulated games, which is large. I'm playing Warhammer 3 Total War right now, which is a good Total War game, which I do enjoy. And yeah, I think next after that will be Baldur's Gate 3 because everybody's talking about it and I should probably play it.
That's all good choices and good things. So, our next one here is from user Gone B. What is the biggest challenge in creating a complex heat system like we will see in a future future update in KSP2?
Can I go with two challenges?
Sure, it's your AMA.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't think I could rank these. Like, there's two challenges: scalability and planability. So scalability is making sure that we've got a system which works on all of the scales that KSP2 is going to be involved in. So it's got to work on like small ships, big ships, small time scales, big time scales. That's hard. So it's hard from a design perspective. It's hard from an engineering perspective. And the approachability aspect of it is also like, it's hard to communicate what thermodynamics is doing to a player, and making that approachable. That's going to be a challenge as well.
That's fair. Our next one here is Rocketman KSP. What do you like about the new heat system? Also, blink 3 times quickly if you're being held against your will and forced to answer softball questions in a positive manner. I hope people see that we don't edit their questions because I read it exactly as that was put in.
I'll leave it up to you guys to decide whether like 30 blinks, how that links into that. That there. I like it because I think it hits our player stories and I think it scales. It's same linked back to the same question as like we're trying to make something that scales and is approachable. And I think we hit those goals. And that's how I define success.
That's a good answer. See, that's not a softball. That's the answer, yeah. Our next one is from Spycat. In the first AMA, Nate mentioned different reentry colors. What will those look like?
Oh, so this is really fun. And this is one of the things I like about my job. Is somebody can say, hey, Chris, what should reentry look like color-wise? And then I get to do a deep dive on plasma emission colors. And that takes up all my morning. And that's lots of fun. I'm gonna not get super too technical here so that we can answer lots of questions. But it's interesting because the how reentry looks is defined by at least three different processes. You've got like plasma emission, you've got like long wave thermal emission, which creates like kind of a heaty glow, and then you've also got kind of like air compression. So when we're talking about color, each of those processes gives you a different color spectrum, and those are affected differently depending on the atmosphere composition. So we've got a specific color of reentry that Earth has that we can generally use in KSP2 for Kerbin. Um, but then we get to do fun things like define the atmospheric gases that should exist, like at Duna, at Eve, and stuff like that, and pull the colors out of those. Like, what does a carbon dioxide atmosphere look like in terms of emission? What does hydrogen look like in terms of emission? So we're trying to get some sort of like realism to coolness balance, which is what we are always trying to strive for here.
Of course.
So yeah, I think you'll see like Earth-like, and then you'll see variations that are different. Different blues, different purples, different reds. It'll be cool, but not cool because it's heat.
I can't wait to see all of the colors. Oh, good
I'm
one.
terrible.
You got me.
Sorry.
You got me. Our next one here is from Hacko. With the heat limit of most parts reduced over KSP1, how do you plan to make KSP2 spaceplanes capable of surviving reentry? Are conformal heat shields in the plans?
Yeah, so I mean, we reduced the numbers, and we also were looking at like what the absolute magnitudes of the fluxes that are coming into the system are. So you shouldn't think that we're going to have lower heat tolerance numbers combined with the same flux numbers for KSP1. My tuning goal is that reentry for Kerbin and the usual things inside the Kerbal system feels generally the same as KSP1. So you'll be able to do your kind of different approaches to landing space planes. I'm pretty terrible at landing space planes. I'm going to have to get offload some testing to somebody who can. But yeah, in terms of conformal heat shields, I'm going to say not initially. We definitely have parts that have heat tiles on the bottom, and we want to eventually be able to use that kind of representation to tell a player, okay, hey, this is better at receiving heat. But that's going to be something we're going to look at after the initial release of the thermal system.
Got it. Our next one here is from Spy Cat. What are the biggest differences you can highlight between science in KSP1 and science in KSP2?
I think one thing we're really trying to get at here is approachability. The KSP1 science system had a good core to work with, but it had a lot of esoteric behaviors that if you didn't know the game really, really well, you couldn't really use, or you could exploit a ton. Like the difference that we usually look at is your average player sitting on the KSC launch pad might be able to collect 10 science, but somebody who knows the ins and outs of that system can collect 100 science. So we want to kind of like make players be able to understand how they're collecting science and scale that, right? Like everybody have the same path, or not the same path, but everybody have a similar path of learning and growing and understanding the system.
Oh, definitely. Making it more accessible to everybody. Our next one here is from Tycho the Pug. What would you say has taken the most time in the upcoming science update?
I think one of our big challenges that we have right now is balancing feature work versus bug work. Obviously, the game has bugs, and we are delivering lots of minor updates that are squashing the hardest bugs, but that takes time from development out of science features effectively. So when I think about what's taken the most time, it's really like, how do we get that good cadence going? How do we accurately balance between making progress on science, but also hitting the core bugs that the community wants to see squashed?
Oh, definitely. Our next one here is from No TM. Was there a particularly difficult science instrument to design and implement? Why or why not?
Um, I think there weren't really any that were difficult to design and implement, but where we have our challenges is more around how we tune them. So it's a lot of like what science experiment gives what returns in terms of science. What are its requirements in terms of does it need to be in a specific place? Does it need specific resources? Does it need specific time? Getting that tuning right is probably the hardest bit about all of this.
Oh, that's fair. Our next one here is from Able Noise. I'm so sorry. I need new glasses or something. It's one of them. Will modding support come in small waves, like how heating will be expanded in every milestone update, or will it be mostly a one-time update?
I think small waves is going to be the answer here. Just like everything else, we want to use early access as a vehicle to like get community feedback on features and like, release an iteration of something, just like heat, and say, here's our baseline. What do we think? Do we need to re-engineer that for the next update? So as we get to modding support, that's also what I want to see. I want to see us release some stuff in a particular structure and then take feedback on that from the community with the next iteration of that.
Just to expand on that one, what needs to be done before modding support will come? That's a follow-up for the same user.
A lot of internal work, I'll say that.
That's fair. Our next one here is from Mad Matt. Will Kerbal receive visual updates to biomes to give it more of an alive feeling?
I would love to see that. And our VFX and SFX team has a lot of cool concepts that we can use to really make biomes interesting on a visual level, a sound level, and all of those kinds of good levels.
Awesome. And the next one here from Pico Space. Are there plans for resource guides to help modders mod within the planned game dynamics versus modders gonna mod and mod without any clear direction and instructions from the dev team on the best way to make stable, coherent mods?
I definitely want to see that happen. A lot of that is something that we need to figure out how we're going to release to the community. So I kind of think that what we want to start with is style guides, and being able to give out people who make parts and maybe make user interfaces information on how to blend those kind of things with the community, and then go from there.
Oh, that's awesome. Our next one here is from Spycat. You really like KSP. We appreciate you, Spycat. What are your favorite tips and tools for new modders?
Think about what you want to build. Don't think about what the community wants you to build. Um, a lot of the challenges that you might run into are, I want to make something for, to fulfill a community need, which is great. But I think I've always got the best results by really, really pulling it down and saying, like, what am I interested in doing? What am I interested in learning? And I think, like, figure out what you want to do. Do you want to make models? Do you want to write code? Do you want to, like, fiddle with UIs? Pick a specialty and do it.
Just a follow from user James M. If I wanted to get started with modding, what route would you suggest that they go down?
I think it's basically the end of that question, right? Pick what you want to do. Pick how you want to do it. You want to make some parts? Let's look at what you would need to do to make a part. You probably need to learn how to model. You probably need to learn how to texture, and do some tests. Figure out if those are things you actually like doing, and do what you like doing versus what you need to do.
That's good advice. Our next one here is from user Poke. Are there any features you modded into KSP1 that you are bringing into KSP2? And what are your favorite, if so?
I'm never going to bring any specific feature that I modded into KSP1 into KSP2. One of the benefits of like working with a core design team here is that we can all work together to get ideas and to build systems that are actually, well, that don't run into the pitfalls that I ran into while I was modding. So although we might build a heat system, which has some elements of what I might have built for KSP1, we're never really going to port anything.
Got it. And then our next one here comes from Fun Phase. KSP is a very physics-intensive project. KSP is also, again, these both performant and fun to play. When these areas are in conflict, how do you decide where to draw the line?
That's a hard one, too, because then it's all about scalability. And I feel like I've said that word a lot. We have to scale every system in the game, right? Like we scale it with the size of a vessel, we scale it with the size of a save, and we scale it with like very minor things like time warp. And a lot of that is kind of player capability, right? A player starts off with a little tiny rocket that can barely go to orbit. And eventually our goal is to get them to have a gigantic colony ship that goes to another solar system. And obviously, within that spectrum, there's performance problems. There's performance that we need to evaluate in terms of every system we add on. If we add up, we think, oh, there's some cool new physics-driven system we want to add in here. Our first thought really has to be like, can we do this in a performant manner? And that's when we bring in the engineering team and we say, hey, we're thinking of doing this. Is this going to be horrifying? And based on how many eyebrows get raised in that meeting, we may scale back our designs. But drawing the exact line is definitely more of an art than a science.
I agree. We hear these words a lot. This next one's from Detau. What is your favorite part in the game, if you have one? Which I hope you have one.
Yeah, I mean, we've got that big spherical hydrogen tank, and then I'll put the swerve on there too because it's a kind of cool pipey engine, and I like cool pipey engines. Um, there are other parts that are more my favorite part in the game that are coming that I'm excited to reveal when we get there.
Not too much longer. Our next one here is from Kaveric. What's your favorite step of developing a new part? What's your least favorite step?
I've really gotten into trying to define the silhouette of a part because we have a lot of parts in the game. Shocker, we're going to have more parts in the game. And we usually have to try to make it so a player knows that they're using a part and what that part's role is. So when we're putting in a new engine, we want to look at its silhouettes versus all the other engines and see, hey, does this look unique enough to build as a part? And that is a really interesting step because we have to consider a lot of different things there, integrate a lot of information, and building out that little, that silhouette, and then getting it through the design team and through the art teams to make sure it makes sense is an interesting challenge.
Definitely. Our next one here, same user. How has your work in here translated into your modding translated to design strategy in KSP2? All of my words there. I can redo it.
Work in KSP1.
Oh, they changed the letters here. Oh, okay. How has your your work in KSP1 translated to your design strategy in KSP2?
I think it's like a lot of the same, right? Like what player stories are we hitting um, with features? And I think one of the differences is that I have a team. I have a team to back up those things. And although we carry over a lot of the way I think about systems, it's nice to have people who can look at those systems and say, Chris, this makes sense. Chris, this is too much, and things like that.
Always nice to have someone to pull us back, right? And working as a team is great. Our next one here is from No TM. How do you determine how much detail and fidelity goes into a particular part? Rocket engine in particular, very complex things, laden with tubes and other components. Where does the simplification start with while remaining true to the aesthetic of a rocket engine? The same goes for tanks, science parts, and all those other things like that.
So let's focus on rocket engines because those are the best.
All right.
It's a challenge to do this. So I mentioned talking about the silhouette, right? So we'll start off by building the appropriate silhouette of a part and making sure that it fits the guidelines. Then we can work on the details of the part. When I'm building an engine, I want to make it a little bit teachable. So I will research, for example, engine cycles. So the way propellant flows into an engine, and I'll pick a cycle for the engine that will make sense based on its role. And then I will build out the approximate plumbing of the engine. And they're never really real, but they're often reality inspired. And the goal here is so that if you're really interested in engines and you look at an engine in KSP2, you might go and Google it and you might learn more about, say, engine cycles and engine piping. We try not to put our detail below a certain size, so we don't want to have really tiny pipes because they're kind of a waste of time. They'll kind of alias out at long ranges. So we want to get a balance there. And we're hitting that balance with our engines. They too tend to be more detailed than other parts because, hey, they're kind of our hero parts. Obviously, I like engines, guys.
Who doesn't, though, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
they drive the game. You can't get off the ground without them. So making those parts it's interesting in that way.
I have one here from Profugo Barbados. I'm sure the team reviewed and rejected a lot of theoretical into design concepts over the lifespan of the project. My question is, what was the most absurd, fantastical one that the team reviewed and rejected?
This is an interesting question because hey, there's a lot of those out there. I think one thing that the teams looked at a lot, particularly before I joined it, was faster than light travel and like LQBR drives, and whether we should include those in there. Those are in some way fantastical because hey, we have no idea how to build one. But a lot of those were put in as rejected, and we're not really aiming to have faster than light travel in KSP2. My favorite one that I periodically want to bring to the design team and then I check myself about it is the Fizzer nuclear rocket, which is basically like a solid rocket booster that's a constantly detonating nuclear explosion. So it like consumes itself physically as it fires. And I think that would look really cool in the game, right? Your rocket's burning itself up as it launches. But the utility of that as a part's probably not going to be super high. So yeah, pretty fantastical. Not going to have it.
Hey, I learned something here. That's cool. The next one here is from Cooling 1200. How will orbital construction work with all the super big parts that can't fit into the VAB? Was the VAB kept on the smaller side to make this orbital construction feature more important?
I think generally we're not really constraining the VAB to make orbital construction more important. It's just the interstellar ships are so damn big that you would need an immense VAB to do it. So our VAB is of a pretty generous size, but it's just not going to get to that kind of scale. So when we get to orbital construction, you'll finally have access to that kind of scale, like hundreds of meters long ships and things like that, that are just, it's kind of the other way around, right? Like we design a VAB that looks more or less correct versus say like the actual VAB in Florida. And that's not going to fit an interstellar ship in it.
That's true. Our next one here is from Seth. How do you go about designing parts for theoretical technologies that have no real world analogs to use for reference?
This is another one of the fun parts of my job is I get to go and I dig into papers. I read white papers and I look at diagrams.
Brought back to the earlier question. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go and we'll look at diagrams and resources, and we'll try to figure out again like what the engine should look like in terms of a silhouette. Is it is it long and thin? Is it like kind of really wide with a big nozzle? Does it even need a nozzle? And then we can usually pull from a lot of concept work that people have done. So maybe we're making an engine that needs a magnetic nozzle, and the author has not seen fit to grace us with a 3D model to look at. But a lot of other people have researched magnetic nozzles, so we can pull in some design elements from those papers and those concepts. And we can actually start to develop a design style that we'll use. Like everything that has a magnetic nozzle looks more or less like this. And we build out a KSP2 style for all of the pieces of the parts that we're doing, which makes it so that, if I need to add a fuel pump, I know more or less what our fuel pumps look like. So it's really an integrated approach and taking inspiration not only from the tech, but like the engineering reality of around the tech.
Got it. Our next one here comes from IsaQuest. What process do you guys follow when designing, creating, and importing a part? What design guidelines do you follow?
I think that's generally the answer to the previous question. We'll end up with specific guidelines for each types of part. And a good one that we've looked at a lot is types of fuel. So we want to be able to say to a player, you're looking at a part which has gold multi-layer insulation. It's probably a hydrogen tank. And then adding highlights on engines that use hydrogen of some gold multi-layer insulation. So we're getting kind of that correspondence and iteration there. Those kind of style things are the things we look at first when we go through this.
Yeah, I love watching the process unfold. Our next one here comes from Failspace. How do you decide how parts are made? For example, with the Mammoth 2, how did you decide to make one colossal engine rather than splitting it into 4 RS-25s? How did you come up with the plumbing?
Well, for this part, we kind of looked at the history of the part, which was really about in KSP1, it was about delivering something that was akin to the Space Launch System, which had those 4 RS-25s as part of it. In KSP2, we are a lot more flexible with how we let you attach engines. Engines can be surface attached. So we figured a player can actually build a pretty good, like kind of SLS type rocket assembly without needing a custom part. And we felt the players would appreciate a really cool single gigantic rocket engine. And I will say that for that engine, a bunch of the plumbing is directly derived from the F1 and F1B engines, F1 engine of reality and the F1B of concept engine, in order to create something that looks realistic and has like some level of, the correct cycle, the correct engineering realities behind it.
I feel like we could listen to you talk about engines and for hours.
Oh, absolutely.
Our next one here is from Mad Matt. How will rotational artificial gravity ring part? How will the rotational artificial gravity ring part showcased in the teasers and trailers work? Will we have multiple iterations of varying sizes?
We're not really looking at specifically simulating different gravity levels in the game right now. It's not really part of our plans, but we do want to have, at least for colonies, different sizes of gravity ring, and not only different sizes, but different roles. A lot of different things you can put into gravity ring, and a lot of different interesting gameplay you can build out of that. And that's all I'll say about that.
Oh, the suspense. We have one here from Rick Hugen. What do you think the most interesting part in terms of gameplay? So how, when, and where to use it?
This is a tough one. I think everything is situational. So when and where to use it is it's the question. This might be slightly controversial, but I really like ion engines. I know a lot of people think they're slow and boring and things, but
Oh no.
the first mod that I ever made was about more ion engines. So I like the Dawn. I like it a lot, and it lets you go anywhere with not a lot of gas, and then you can cover your ship with solar panels, and it looks cool.
That's fair. The next one here comes from Space. This is the Space Peacock. Will we see more than one engine per engine class at some point? For example, multiple medium Methalox sustainer engines, gridded and Hall effects, ion thrusters.
The second part of that question about the more ion engines, I would love to see more ion engines in the game, and we did tease one as well in the lead up to early access that we'll get to eventually. In terms of different engines of the same size and archetype, that's not really something we're intending to deliver. That's a pretty good thing for the modding community to work on. But broadly, in my opinion, if you've got an engine that two engines in the same archetype and size category, I'm not really sure what you're going to use to differentiate those engines. They're going to be very similar in terms of overall kind of like performance levels. So there's definitely probably valid player stories in doing that, but it's something that I think I'd like to leave to the modding community.
Got it. Our next one comes from German Knight. Is there still an option to add non-dynamic wings from KSP1?
We think that our current procedural wing system hits all the use cases for those. If there are more use cases we're not hitting, I would love to hear about them. So throw that in the forums or on Discord.
Leave it in the comments below. Our next one here is from MGB125. What size scale can we expect for interstellar ship parts?
Big. I think one of the things that's kind of cool about the interstellar parts is that we talk about like our size categories, right? Which are often based on the bulkhead. So a size large part is 3.75 meters wide. When we get to interstellar parts, hey, they're big. They're like 10 meters wide, 20 meters wide, that kind of thing. But the length starts to be important too. So you can expect to see really wide and really big parts and new and interesting ways to mix those together on your ships to make a really cool thing.
Got it. Our next one here comes from Pugnuts. How is the colony stuff going? There's been some recent concern on whether launching rockets will be free in science. If so, will there be an issue for progression?
We're effectively designing our progression system in such a way that that's not an issue. I should clarify that as we're going through our milestones, the science milestone is going to be more similar to the science mode from KSP1. So you didn't really have cache in that mode in KSP1. So we're working within the same constraints in terms of that. In the far future, when we have resources and things, we're often taking the approach that we want players to feel like they're able to do a lot of stuff from the KSC and from colonies. So I'm not going to say launching rockets will be free. There's always going to be a cost associated with a rocket. But the amount of various resources that you might have access to at the KSC at different places is going to control what you can launch when.
Got it. Our next one here comes from Clay L. In your previous role as a modder, you did modeling and scripting. Do you still do those things at Intercept?
I do need to get my script checks cleared by a real engineer, but I occasionally dabble in adjusting numbers of decimal places displayed in part modules and various tiny things like that. But mostly I stick in concept modeling and writing long and complex design documents.
Our next one here comes from Piotr. Do you sometimes have to revise your ideas because of performance constraints?
Yeah, I think it's fair. It's like we'll start out with something ambitious. We might not understand that it is ambitious when we ask for it. And then when we get the engineering team to do initial considerations, we realize that we need to scale back our ambitions and take it back into the shop. And yeah, that's just part of the design process.
Or the best part of working with the team, right? Our next one here comes from Benzo Key. What are you guys working on right now? What is the priority list?
We are working on the science milestone and bugs. So, we're getting towards delivering that, and we're constantly delivering new patches. There's a new patch coming soon, which will squash a bunch more bugs, and we're excited to see what kind of effect that has on players, and eventually as we get towards the full science update with the parts of Heat that we're going to release in there. Yeah, the team's working on all those things.
Yeah, I know we can't wait to see it. It's going to be good. Our next one comes from Spycat again. We appreciate you. This is for features that divide the community. We often hear the argument, just make it an option. For you, when should a feature be an option, and when should this choice be made by the developers?
We have to be really careful with making features options. Even if we make a feature an option, we still incur all of the development costs of that feature. So we have to balance what player stories that option would be hitting with the total cost of that feature in terms of developer time, which can be significant. We're also adding a lot of burden to QA then, because they're effectively having to test every version of the game twice. So you'll be testing it with the optional feature on and with the optional feature off, which really we've got a big game and a lot of it requires a large QA coverage already. So we have to make that decision. That decision is very not light. We also, even on the design phase, we're effectively having to consider two different player paths when we do that. So if we're going to consider making something complex an option, we still need to make sure the game's playable by players in both states. So although it's something we could consider doing, it's not our first choice.
Oh, that's totally fair. Our next one here comes from Paradak. What has been the biggest or funniest challenge or bugs in the development of science and heating? You can go biggest or funniest.
I think one of our biggest challenges has been coordinating all of our teams to get together and deliver the greatest experience possible. It's like we've got so many big plans for science, and making sure that we've accurately scoped out everything that we want to deliver and delivering that. It's always a big challenge in any project. It's a challenge I love to engage with, and yeah, well, we're equal to it.
I hear that one. We have one from J Peggy is cool. Will rover wheels be changed in the future to be improved, and how do you figure that out?
In the near future, what we really want to do is nail down a lot of the bugs that are affecting players' experiences with rovers. There are definitely a number in the bug reports forum that we get from the community that we're looking into to try to look at the experience. Personally, I want tank treads eventually in the game, so I can make like really cool tank rovers. So I'd like to evolve our wheel systems to the point where we can support something like that.
I love rovers, so I can't wait to. Our next one here is from Lord Octave. What will interstellar travel look like? Just a burn and time warp until destination, or an animation?
Like we're aiming for the former. It'll work just like any other vessel. You'll take your ship, you'll put it into an appropriate departure orbit, and then you will plot a course, and then fire your engines for a long time. And you'll keep firing your engines. Then you'll do what in an interstellar sense is usually called a flip and burn. So you'll burn for half the journey to expend your fuel and speed up. And then when you get to the midpoint, you'll turn around and burn the other way. So it's going to be an interesting, different way of flying your ships than you usually do in the Kerbal system. But it will use generally the same systems.
Got it. Our next one here is from Gig Fizz. Earlier on, I got the impression there was going to be potential for vessels / stations with truly massive part counts, far greater than KSP-1, which would choke really hard on a larger craft. But as it stands right now, optimization is not at a point yet where it can go very far with the part counts. Assuming I was not misunderstanding, is this going to be a thing eventually, at least by 1.0?
This is a core goal that we have in our game, is like we need to scale things. And I think I've said scale a lot of times already today. And as we go through milestones, we're going to have specific performance targets that we want players to be able to achieve. And those are effectively going to increase with every milestone update. We're going to have a specific target for colonies, a specific target for interstellar, and then a specific target as we go towards 1.0. So the goal is to deliver more parts per ship, more parts per save, more ships per save, to make it so that you can truly have a Kerbal interstellar civilization.
I know the community and everyone can't wait for that, so that's great. Our next one here is from Novoraptor TV. Could we see the addition of linear aerospike as a usable part for SSTOs?
I like linear aerospikes. I think we should make it, but I can't confirm that or deny it.
That's that team part, right?
Yeah.
Our next one here is from Surprise. Will we be able to see? Will we be able to use any fuel type with nuclear engines instead of just hydrogen?
I don't believe this is on the plan right now. We do have plans to release the Us, I think it was, which has 2 modes, which uses an afterburning nuclear engine, an afterburning mode, and a normal hydrogen mode. Functionally, this isn't in the cards right now. This is one of the areas where I experimented in my mods with, and I found that there was not a lot of utility in this. That's probably disputable, but that's one of the places where we're going to look at a feature that is implemented by some mods and see whether it's worth implementing and whether we're really going to get player benefits out of it. Fuel types are hard. I think if you go and dig around in my dev blog about engine archetypes and things, there's some comments about how challenging it really is to introduce players and onboard players to new fuels and their abilities. And that's something we really need to consider when we make multi-propellant engines.
I definitely learn every time I read one of your dev blogs, I learn something new. So our next one here comes from German4730. How will metallic hydrogen engines play into late-game interplanetary travel?
Well, they're going to be powerful. They have a different performance envelope than Methalox engines, and they have different resource requirements. So what we're aiming to do is, at least in a small way, preserve the role of most of our primary engine and fuel types throughout the game. So, hey, even if maybe you'll land on a planet where it's most effective to build Methalox rockets, even though you have a fusion drive. It's kind of where we want to go with this. So there will be a time and a place for metallic hydrogen to shine, and there will be places where it will not work so well.
That's exciting. All right. Our next one here is from Lunar Metis. Are there plans to add light sail interstellar probes?
We don't have these on the immediate roadmap, but in terms of having various esoteric versions of propulsion, we're always looking at how we can deliver the player stories with that. And it kind of goes back to what do we want to build versus what do we want to enable the community to build. One thing with solar sails and laser sails and things like that is that they work completely differently than any other engine that we have in the game. So that means that we can't kind of just drop them in. We need to think about how a player is going to interact with that system. And do I need to build a solar sailing interface where it shows me what direction the wind is coming from so I can tack properly back and forth? I mean, it sounds really cool, but that's a lot of effort for one part.
Yeah, you sold me. No, that makes total sense on that part. The next one here is from Gordon Lemons. Will there be inflatable modules in KSP2?
Yep.
Perfect. Next one's from Mad Matt. Will there be more loading screens?
Yup. I have reviewed 2 new loading screens this week. They're pretty great, and you'll see them in the game.
Oh, now I got to go try and find those. Our next one here is from Nova Raptor TV. Could we see telescopes like the Hubble and James Webb make their way into KSP2? Will they have the ability to be repaired on orbit and also collect science that players can use?
I think that we want to be more ambitious with telescopes than that. There's a lot more exciting things you can do with telescopes than just collect basic science.
Ooh, all right. Our next one here comes from JPEGgy is cool. Are there plans for environmental effects? Will there be Kerbal footprints, rover tire marks, etc.? Will there be dust in the air on Duna, for example?
Yeah, this is effectively what our VFX and SFX teams work towards, right? Is creating that like immersive environment when you're on the surface of the planet. We want to be careful about performance here. We throw a lot more volumetric particles onto the surface of Duna. We're gonna have to be careful about, how we're doing that. So that's really the primary consideration that I'm aware of there. We want to make things super immersive, but we're aware that we need to be performant too.
Definitely, performance. Our next one here comes from PlaySue. When colonies are implemented, will heat be required for habitation modules in colder environments?
Not in the current design. We're mostly focusing on having players understand overheating as a concern rather than underheating.
Got it. Our next one here comes from RageX. Has there been consideration to giving procedural fuel tanks, alternatively reducing the number of fuel tanks in list or providing more variety and shape while implementing a part switcher?
I think this is like one of the two biggest community questions and splits that exist. Like there's like to mech jab or not to mech jab, and then there's like procedural fuel tanks or atomic fuel tanks. And I think like what we've come down on in the KSP 2 context is to stick with the kind of like Lego ability fuel tanks. Part of the reason for that is trying to make players understand different fuels, and that's a hard problem. So at least with having specific fuel types locked between specific artistic cues, you can say to players, this is hydrogen, this is methyl ox, this is metallic hydrogen, and so on and so forth. So there is a big advantage that we get with not doing fuel switching in that sense. That being said, making sure that the part picker is usable and that you can find what you want effectively is a core goal, so we have to look at that. But no, near term, no procedural plans for tanks.
Got it. Our next one here is from Nova Raptor TV. Considering that grid fins are confirmed for KSP2, we potentially see telescoping landing legs like on Falcon 9 and New Glenn, they believe, in KSP2 as parts we can use as for reusable boosters.
Definitely want more landing legs in the game. I'm not sure I would specifically target the Falcon 9 types. I really like those like rocket punk ships where you've got like 3 fins on a rocket and they've got like pods on the end. So if you had kind of like podded landing legs, that would be real. That would hit my use case personally. But like we're gonna have larger ships. We want players to be able to land their larger ships and land them in different contexts. So as we get deeper into the tech tree, deliver bigger and bigger parts, this is something that we absolutely need to look at.
Got it. I love geeking out over parts. This is fun for me now. Our next one here comes from Vlonald Kerman. Will metal to build basic rockets and methyl ox fuel be limited in the early game, or will it be infinite fuel on Kerbin?
This is pretty similar to another question, so I think I've got the same general answer, which is that this is a fairly far future question in the sense that in the science update, we're looking at the same scope as KSP1's science mode generally. And in that case, we're not going to have limits of resources on Kerbin. But going forward, again, like our goal is to push the player to explore outward rather than to explore kind of like inward. My kind of personal opinion on kind of the role of money and stuff and scarce ability in this is that like we want to make sure that players feel empowered to try new things in safe environments. Kerbin's a safe environment. When you get out of safe environments, when you've got your colony on Duna and stuff, that's where your resources come in.
Our next one here comes from Warthog23. Will there be engines, structural frames, or other parts that be constructed and operated in a low G environment?
We definitely have parts that are more fragile than others, but we're not going to specifically constrain you to where you can build those. If you want to try to make a rover out of super fragile parts, we should allow you to do that. might not succeed, but maybe you'll also make a really cool thing. And I don't want to give players too many constraints that way.
Fair. Our next one here comes from Dibsner. Are there any plans to implement parts that would enable underwater exploration, such as a ballast tank and pumps? Great work on the game so far, by the way.
Much appreciated.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
I definitely like to have more scope for parts in terms of water stuff. We've got 3 fairly waterful. Oh, that's not really a word, is it?
Waterfall.
We've got there's 3 celestial bodies with a lot of water on them in the Kerbal system, and there's going to be more in the other systems. And while this is not Kerbal Boat Program, letting players build planes is something we've done, and we have a lot of parts dedicated to players building planes. It's definitely logical that as we go forward and we have more oceans to explore, we'd want to deliver some sort of deep water exploration and maybe cool things to find at the bottom of the ocean, like krakens.
That sounds waterful. I've been saving that one. I had to. I'm working on those dad jokes. There you go. Our next one here comes from Novaraptor TV. If you were to add another class of space plane parts, what would they be based off of? I can see something like Venture Star or Star Raker or something more like a traditional airliner.
Oh, this is another one of the problems I crunched during KSP1 mods a lot. It turns out that a lot of the really cool space planes that you see in fiction are really their cross section is not consistent, right? They start off big at the back and then they get narrow at the front. You can't build a size class off of those. It's really hard. So we wouldn't see a Venture Star alike. We wouldn't see those kind of things. If we were to build more spaceplane size categories, what I'd probably do is I'd take them very far in the lifting body direction. So you'd kind of think like the Mark II cross section, but big, to let you make those really big, cool. I'm trying to think about the spaceship, the Valkyrie in Avatar. It's really big, flat, lifting body kind of thing, and that's what's hard to build with our current part set. So I would want to make that kind of thing easier.
Got it. And then one question here from Jimmy McGretzky. How do you pronounce Nertea? Is it Nertea, Nertea, Nertea? There's a bunch of things
you
on
got
here.
You got it right. It's Nertea. So I knew that one was coming.
So we didn't. I should have said it earlier, but yes, I wanted to surprise everyone with how to pronounce here. Does Nertea come iced or is it only hot?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think I like the cold better than hot, so we'll call it iced.
I second.
Much
that
like
one.
Revenge, it could be only cold.
And we have a couple more here, but any unannounced features, part systems that we have no hints of but are in the works? Yes or no?
Yes.
Spoiler.
Yes.
And then we have one fun one here I'd like to end on here. What's your favorite type of donut?
I didn't prepare for this. This is
Kerbal.
This is such a problematic question. I like a good cruller, like a honey cruller.
All right.
It's light, it's interesting, but also the basic long john is pretty ideal.
This is just, I don't even know what those are, but I'm gonna say solid choices.
I don't know if those are Canada specific or anything either. So
they might be. I've only been there a couple of times. Well, first I just want to say that there are a lot of questions still that we did not reach, so you will find those on the forums that will be expanded on in much more detail. Because if you read anything Chris writes before, he'll definitely expand some detail some of those questions there. We also are taking feedback inside the Discord as well as in the forums. But the Discord, we have a designated channel for you to give your feedback for how we're doing, so we can improve these in the future for all of you. And I just want to say thank you very much for joining us, taking time out of your busy development cycle to actually just come hang out with us and answer some questions with the community.
No, it was a pleasure. It was lots of fun. A lot of good questions. And I will definitely have fun diving into some of the longer ones on the forums.
Yeah, wait. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the community before we log out?
Thanks for playing KSP2. It's a ton of fun to watch the game grow and to watch the community grow with it, even from the other side. So,
Really. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.